Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. So it's time for a very serious discussion about Jeffrey Epstein. And I tell you, there's always so much talk about politically about what's going on with him and the implications that he's had on different political politicians and political parties around the world and individuals. But let's not lose sight of the victims, the true victims of this. In my opinion, is being spoken about to protect the victims and of the heinous crimes that he committed. So let's just always remember that. So let's get started. I have Thomas Munson with me today from the UK. Hey Thomas, how are you?
Yeah, all the better for being with you this morning, Dane.
Oh, you're always very kind, very kind. So let's talk about Jeffrey Epstein. Now, no, it's one of those things. The headline is Jeffrey Epstein is toppling a leader of a country, and it's not Donald Trump, but it looks like he's well on his way to being the end to Keir Starmer. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely. Well, Keir Starmer, obviously the UK Prime Minister at the moment, I think he had something of a stay of execution yesterday. There were certainly moments where it looked like that his premiership would be coming to an end. You had the leader of the Scottish Labour Party calling for his resignation early in the afternoon. Thought that was to create a domino effect and that various other people would come out calling for his resignation. But he just about managed to survive. But the reason that he got into this mess in the first place, of course, mentioned on your show, was Jeffrey Epstein. Now, Sir Keir Starmer is somebody who's had a Jeffrey Epstein himself. In fact, when he was the director of the UK's Crown Prosecution Service, he did a tremendous amount to convict the perpetrators of abuse of children. So I think it's important to, whenever we're having a conversation about Keir Starmer in this context, it's important to note that he's always been on the right side when it comes to this sort of thing. However, the reason that he's ended up in the predicament he's been in was his appointment of Lord Mandelson, Peter Mandelson, who became the UK's ambassador to the United States in 2024. And the reason that's caused such a problem for this current administration is was Lord Mandelson's involvement with Epstein. It was a long-standing involvement. It was an involvement that continues after Epstein had been convicted as a paedophile. And what happened fundamentally is that Lord Mandelson claimed that this relationship wasn't actually a significant relationship. It was just somebody that he sort of knew. And Keir Starmer claims that he took Lord Mandelson's word for that, which I think serious questions about how we vet people in these important positions, ambassador to the United States. If you can just tell the Prime Minister something and he'll believe it, that doesn't sound like much of a vetting process at all.
Well, let me ask this question. Like in the United States, when we have an ambassador, it has to go to Senate confirmation. When you guys appoint an ambassador, what's the approval process? Is it just strictly the Prime Minister can say, okay?
Yeah, more or less. So the security services can make their recommendation based on what they found during the vetting process. But when it comes to political appointees, it is very much a recommendation as opposed to something binding. And so, in the case of Lord Mandelson, Keir Starmer, there were concerns that were raised. Morgan McSweeney, who was the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff until the weekend, still advised strongly that Keir Starmer appoint Mandelson despite these concerns. And if you actually examine the relationship between Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson, that makes quite a lot of sense because it's Peter Mandelson who's a long-standing figure in the Labour Party. He was involved in the Tony Blair and Gordon Brown administrations and is seen as something of one of the key architects of what people refer to as New Labour. And it was really Lord Mandelson that brought Morgan McSweeney into the Labour fold and kind of moulded him in his own image. For want of a better word, in the context of this conversation, Lord Mandelson certainly groomed Morgan McSweeney. And so it's no surprise that he would, in spite of all this sort of concerning advice around Lord Mandelson, that Morgan McSweeney would still back him and still try and persuade the Prime Minister to make him the ambassador anyway.
Well, so let's talk about, I mean, so the security services vetted him, and so just to be very clear, the Prime Minister Keir Starmer says, "Hey, I don't care what the security services said, but my chief of staff says it's okay," and so he decided to go ahead with Mandelson. Now, but that fell apart. Mandelson had to leave, and what led to his departure, from the United
Yeah.
States?
Well, there are fresh developments that weren't in the vetting, or weren't in the guidance that security gave about the significance of the relationship between Epstein and Lord Mandelson. Famously, Peter Mandelson left Epstein a note calling him his best pal, which isn't a great look for anybody. And more recently, there have been more revelations that have come out that have been even more damning. In 2008, Lord Mandelson was brought back to Labour government. I think it was the third time that he'd been brought into Labour government, having been sacked in disgrace the previous two times. So there's a bit of a pattern with this particular individual, where during the banking crisis in 2008, where all the world leaders were getting together to try and bail out the global financial system, Lord Mandelson was happily emailing this confidential information along to Jeffrey Epstein, so that he could make investment decisions off the back of what the world governments were doing, which is, I think, particularly damning. During that, I think we can all agree, it was a very difficult time for everyone globally, that he saw that as an opportunity to enrich his paedophile friend.
Well, we have just 2 minutes here before a break, and then we're going to come back because I do want to get to what I call Randy Andy, and definitely talk about him. But as far as Mandelson's concerned, now he had to resign from the Labor Party, correct? But is there a possibility of prosecution against him?
So that's subject to investigation at the moment. The police have raided two addresses of Lord Mandelson's at the moment, to look at the scale of the information that was leaked by him to Jeffrey Epstein during that period of time.
Hmm. So where is it? Around the world, there's so many stories as we talked about with Epstein, but in the UK, it's actually possibly leading to not only the potential fall of Keir Starmer, which we'll talk more about after the break, but it's also leading to potential police charges as well, which is crazy. But real quick on the but the other quick seconds before the break, but not only I mean, but one of the big breaks within the Labor Party is the fact that his number two came out and is now no longer supporting Keir Starmer, right? What's her? I forget her name. Who was the vice?
Yeah, you referring to Angela Rayner?
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, hold that thought because it's now 12. And so let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be right back with you. Thanks a lot. Welcome back to Around the World with Dane Waters. Let's continue with Thomas Munson, our special guest from the UK, to talk about Jeffrey Epstein. So we just before the break, we were talking about Angela Rayner, who I'd forgotten her name. Thanks for reminding me. Because early on, I know that she was kind of pushing back against the prime minister, and she used to be one of his staunchest supporters. And is he losing her support?
Yes, I mean, a few months ago, Keir Starmer was forced to make Angela Rayner resign over some unpaid taxes. So she's not been as central to the Keir Starmer administration over the last few months. He came out yesterday in support of the Prime Minister. Do I think that was sincere support? Absolutely not. Only a couple of weeks ago, Angela Rayner, her team anyway, bought the domain name Angela to lead us. So I think you can certainly see where her intentions lie, but I think she'd be well placed to succeed because of Keir Starmer. So why wouldn't she be putting herself in that position?
Well, let's break away from Mendelssohn. Let's talk about former Prince Andrew. Now he's Andrew. I don't know his. Yeah, and
Andrew Windsor, yeah.
yeah. So what's going on with I'm going to call him Prince Andrew. I'm going to get in trouble for using his official title, but the world understands him as Prince Andrew. So
Yeah.
what's going on with him? I mean, he definitely was the big scandal, but it looks like he has even more issues now, more problems now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that has dragged out for close to 6 years, I think now. There was an infamous BBC interview where the former Prince Andrew, sat down with the BBC and said that he regretted his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and that he hardly knew him and that he only met him once after he'd been convicted out of sense of duty, and that all the allegations against him were completely phony. Well, obviously, um, fresh pictures have come to light which appear to show Prince Andrew on Epstein Island with women whose faces are censored for obvious reasons, who appear to be unconscious, which are rather unsavoury, look very damning for the royal family, of course, as well. Um, he's somebody really been stripped of almost all of his titles. At one point, they were even talking about because he served time in the military, they were even talking about taking away some of his military honours as well. And like Mandelson, as you said, fresh allegations against him now that he may have been leaking sensitive government information that he was privy to as a member of the royal family to Jeffrey Epstein, so that Jeffrey Epstein could enrich himself and use this insider information.
Well, I saw where the king, because he was actually, so the former prince was actually required to move out of his house at Windsor, and then he's
Yeah,
moving into a private house on one of the king's personal estates. But now the king, I think I saw, came out yesterday or today and said that he would not object to an investigation of his brother.
no, yes, absolutely. Ever since the Queen passed, the Queen Prince Andrew was famously the Queen's sort of favourite son, as it were, and she was always a big protector of his interests and his reputation. His brother, now King Charles, has not shown any sort of willing to shield his brother, and I think he understands the reality, as does Prince William, the King's son. That I mean, Prince Andrew, much like Keir Starmer, but in a different way, is a dead man walking, and if they want to preserve the reputation of the royal family, if they want people to continue to accept, excuse me, continue to accept the royal family in this country, then if they're seen to be protecting somebody who's been supporting and friends with and engaged in activities with the convicted paedophile, that would be incredibly damaging for House Windsor.
When was the last time, actually? So when was the last time a member of the royal family was actually investigated by the police? I mean, I guess he doesn't have any protections now that he's been removed of all his titles, right?
Yeah, honestly, I couldn't tell you. It's an extremely rare thing to happen. Normally, any sort of investigations like this you might expect to take place behind closed doors. For a long time, when Queen Elizabeth was still alive, they did appear to be protecting Prince Andrew. Certainly, when there was diplomatic pressure from America for Congress, we wanted to speak to Prince Andrew. It was made very clear at that time that that is something that the royal family and the British government in turn were never allowed to happen. Whereas now, I think Prince Andrew has been thrown to the wolves, and perhaps rightly so.
Yeah, I know this is the whole thing. We talked earlier. I mean, you hear so much about the victims. Well, you don't hear enough about the victims, but it seems like all the victims, most of the ones that are talked about are American victims. Were there any of the perceived Epstein victims that were British? Are they all American or for other nationalities?
I'm not sure that there were any notable British victims in this particular case. Certainly, from what I've seen from the Epstein files that have been leaked, as you said, there seems to be a very large number of American victims, European victims as well. Eastern Europe does have quite a large problem with people trafficking. for the sex industry. And so that it's not at all surprising that Jeffrey Epstein would use that infrastructure for um, his ring, essentially.
So do you think that so we have to leave here in a second, but just real quickly, do you think, what do you say in the next, 3 to 6 months? Do you think, what are the implications of the Epstein issue in the UK? Anything new we're going to see, or what's going to happen?
Well, what it's certainly done is put, as I said, Keir Starmer's had a stay of execution. I think a friend of mine who works in Parliament, I spoke with yesterday, he described the atmosphere in Westminster as something of a tinderbox atmosphere. And this has certainly contributed significantly to that. While it may not bring down Keir Starmer on its own, it certainly led to a political context in which one wrong move from the Prime Minister now would almost certainly see an end of his leadership. It's cost him enormous political capital. And it just shows how far-ranging this Epstein scandal is, with, of course, you're aware, implications to the American government. I think the Crown is caught up in this as well. It seems very deep and very wide.
Yeah, I know. I was reading where one of the former foreign ministers, one of the economic ministers in France had to resign. One of the economic ministers in Spain had to resign. I mean, it's definitely. I mean, Epstein, as we talked about, had tentacles all over the world. And I do think at some point in time we have to get a deeper dive into where his money has come from. New accusations that he was a front for Russia or he was an agent for Israel. I mean, there's so many things there that I think eventually are going to come out, and all of that. So listen, Thomas, it's always a great pleasure seeing you, man. You look great with your beard. I know it's trimmed a little bit, but I'm a
Thank
big
you.
fan of guys with beards. So anyway, very nice. Anyway, you take care, and I look forward to seeing you again soon on the show. Okay, so
It's been a pleasure, Dane.
let's take a quick break from Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll be right back.